This is from Draft History, and this is a tweet on the Browns and some of those names of guys that you mentioned. So Zane Gonzalez, Browns gave up on him, and he's been effective with other teams. Same thing with Greg Joseph. Austin Seibert has been kind of mediocre, maybe even a little bit less than he was with the Browns. But part of that kind of lets you take a look. Cody Parkey was better with the Browns. McLaughlin was better before he got to the Browns. So it's been kind of a mixed bag as far as the Browns and finding that kicker. And we saw just how critical that portion of the game is when you're playing good football teams. Special teams really matter in close games like you're going to be playing in the playoffs. We saw that yesterday and Saturday.
Easily. And I go back to something I said a long time ago about the Ravens, even just earlier this season, that when you're playing them in a 2-minute drill or when they had the ball of less than 2 minutes to go in that situation, they have an advantage knowing that as soon as they cross the 50, they're in field goal range. And I mean that partially in jest, but partially that's also true because of just how good Justin Tucker is. I'm not saying they can find a kicker as good as Justin Tucker because, he's probably the best kicker we've ever seen in football. And Evan McPherson can certainly catch up because we've seen just how good he is. He's hit quite a few 50-yarders, early on in his NFL career. But again, they just have to be able to find the right guy. And it's not just about statistics. You can look at the picks like Zane Gonzalez and Austin Seibert. Those guys had some pretty solid kicking numbers in college, but numbers don't always tell the story in college. You got to be able to handle the pressure of those kicks. You got to be mentally tough. That when the game's on the line, when your season's on the line, that you're gonna come through with your team, and that's something you can't evaluate in stats. So that's a tricky thing to figure out with kicking, but it's really only a position I think you can go after if you have a lot of needs covered, and that's where I think the Browns are in a decent position to take one just because they have depth in a lot of areas. So this should be a draft where if you find a kicker or even a punter you like in the 5th or 6th round, don't be afraid to use a pick on them. The Browns took a long step in the 5th round for a decade, and back in 2003, and Ryan Pomperian was around for a decade. So it's one little thing that you didn't have to worry about for a decade was trying to find, one of those guys. So it just comes down to just getting lucky and trusting your scouts that you're going to find a good guy and, not being afraid to take a swing with one of those picks.